Hi everyone, welcome to Crisper Cleanout Meals. I'm gonna wait for some folks to hop on here, but the class today is going to cover all the different ways you can use that leftover produce that you might have sitting at the bottom of your crisper, at the bottom of your fridge, from your Sola Gratia CSA box, or from the farmer's market, or any of the other channels you might get delicious, nutritious, fresh and organic Sola Gratia produce. And we're not going to actually make that many dishes today. We're going to keep it pretty simple. We're going to be making a soup, which of course is kind of a go-to crisper clean-out meal. We're going to be making what I like to call compost nachos. So nachos using whatever you have hanging out in your fridge, especially if it's getting a little bit limp or it just really needs to get eaten. And then the third thing we're going to make is a really simple sheet pan meal. So we're going to be making sheet pan gnocchi, which can basically utilize anything that you have going in your fridge. So we're gonna, some stuff is already in the oven, some stuff's already on the stove since we only have 1 hour together today. But I thought I'd also go over some things that you might have in your pantry that can you can use to pull together a really easy weeknight meal. So Fiona says she's excited for this class because her fridge is really stinky right now. And I have to kind of admit that John and I's fridge is a little stinky all the time. We have so much produce that's packed in there that we're constantly working through. And sometimes, yeah, we forget some things in the crisper drawer. And we have to do a major fridge clean out later. So my name is Kaitie Adams. I am a local farmer and Sola Gratia veggie enthusiast. I come from a background in organic veggie farming where I really learned how to utilize all the vegetables that are in abundance all the time, even when they're a little stinky, even when they start to have some brown spots and things like that on there. Just because it's starting to decompose doesn't mean that it can't make a super nutritious meal. So the first thing that we're going to go over today in the class is just a really simple soup recipe. So this can be utilized any sort of root vegetables that you have laying around. So what I mean by root vegetables are things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, carrots, rutabaga, turnips, beets. You can use even bulby things like fennel and onions. And it's a pureed soup, which means we're going to throw everything together in one pot. Let it simmer, and then we're going to puree it at the end. And what the puree does is we have all these vegetables that cook at different speeds, so it allows them to kind of get mushy together, and then we utilize the mushiness and the starchiness to create something that's really creamy and delicious. So I have a pot of vegetable soup that's simmering away on the stove, so I'm going to pull it off and we'll go over what's in this one. So give me 1 second while I pull it off. So this recipe comes from the New York Times, and it's kind of their like everything but the kitchen sink vegetable soup. So what you're going to do is you're going to start off by sauteing 1 whole onion or 2 shallots or a fennel bulb, something in the allium family, with 4 tablespoons of butter or 4 tablespoons of oil. You really need a good amount of oil in here because that's going to provide some richness to the soup. When you're just making a vegetable soup, you need a little something for body and a little bit of something to get that kind of savory, umami taste going. And the great thing about butter over oil is that you have the saltiness and the fattiness. But honestly, I use oil butter because I don't eat dairy because it does terrible things to my stomach. So I started melting 4 tablespoons of plant-based butter. I added 1 onion. I let that become translucent for about 7 to 10 minutes. It depends on how high heat you have up. So I just do it on medium. If it gets a little crispy, that's fine. That just adds a little depth of flavor to the soup. And then I added 3 cloves of garlic that I just simply chopped up. You know, when it comes to chopping garlic or onions for soup, it really doesn't matter what size it is because it's going to cook down and get pureed anyway. So when I added the garlic after about 7 minutes of sauteing the onions, then I added 2 bay leaves and then the herb profile of the soup. So we added that in and then I sauteed it. So the herbs that I used were sage and thyme because those are going to go really well with the root vegetables that I added in. So you add the garlic, the bay leaves, the sage and thyme, and you saute that for 1 minute. And what that's doing is it's releasing the oils in the herbs, and it's going to provide a depth of flavor that you wouldn't get if you just sprinkled it in at the end or after you added liquid. The heat and the oil just really brings out a really nice flavor bouquet. So I use dry herbs, but you could definitely use fresh, and if you use fresh, I would recommend making what's called an herb bouquet. And an herb bouquet is just when you tie a bunch of fresh herbs together and then you throw it in the pot. And the great thing about that is then you just pull it out right before you puree the soup. So I sauteed that for 1 minute, and then I added my vegetables. So what I have in here is 1 kohlrabi, 4 carrots, a bunch of purple turnips, or the scarlet queen turnips, so they're kind of salad turnips. And I think that's it. I think that's all I put in here. Oh, and some sweet potato. So sweet potato as well, and they're just in 1-inch chunks. So not very big. You can make the chunks bigger, but you're gonna have to cook the soup longer. Excuse me. So then I just had that simmering on the stove. So you bring it to a boil, and then you bring it down to simmer for 30 to 40 minutes or until the vegetables are fork tender. And so hopefully we'll get to the pureeing part at the end of this class. If not, I'll go over how to do it, but I'm going to put this back on the stove. So the great thing about this sort of like root vegetable soup is it doesn't matter what vegetables you have or in what quantities, because you can adjust the recipe. You can adjust the recipe based on what you have and the quantities that you have. And it makes it super duper duper easy to take whatever is rotting in your crisper and make it happen. So when I was processing the vegetables, or peeling them or breaking them down, however processing, whatever terminology you use, I was saving the peels of the carrots, onion, and garlic skins, fennel fronds, which I use in another recipe that we're going to go over here in a second. And the reason I pulled these aside is because these can be used to make a really nutritious broth. So if you have stuff that's kind of going bad in the pantry, one thing you can do with it is just simply make a broth. Some things broth better than others. So things in the allium family, good to broth. Root vegetables that are sweeter, on the sweeter side of things, good to broth. So I'm thinking carrots, I'm thinking fennel, things that get sweeter when you roast them, or they're kind of frost-kissed in the field. Things that don't broth very well are beets, turnips, what else is in here? Sweet potatoes or regular potatoes don't make a very good broth. Make a very good soup, but not a very good broth. Kohlrabi, would not recommend unless you're a huge kohlrabi fan and you love things like cabbage soup. And you'll notice that there are some onion peels in here, and the reason this is in the no broth pile is because there's a little bit of mold or decay that's happening. So here's kind of a decay ring on the inside of an onion. So I cut around it and use the whole rest of the onion, but I actually don't want that to go in my broth. And the reason I don't want it to go in the broth is if it's moldy, then my entire broth is going to have mold spores in it. Or if there's rot, it has the potential to introduce rot into the broth or just a really bad flavor. Like, we want things that go really well together. Celeriac tops, really good to broth. Turnip tops and beet tops, not good to broth, mostly because they kind of have a dirt taste to them. Oh, I got a timer going off. And that timer is going off because I'm pulling out to flip some crispy purple fries. So these are from Purple Potatoes, and these are going to serve as the basis for our Compost nachos. So most folks, when they think of nachos, they just think of tortilla chips and things like that. But root vegetables actually make, I gotta find a spatula now. Root vegetables make a really great base for nachos. So what I did is I cut these purple potatoes, let's see if I can get a good angle here, into about 1/4 inch strips. I washed them. I did not peel them because the skin is like the best part. Like, it gets so crispy. So I washed them, did not peel them, cut them into 1/4 inch kind of strips so they look like fries you might get at McDonald's. And then here's the trick to super crispy onion fries. You soak them in hot water for 10 minutes. So when you soak them in water, what you're effectively doing is allowing the potatoes to release the starch. So the starch is one of the things that makes potatoes soggy. So when we want really crispy oven fries that kind of mimic deep fried fries, we need to get that starch out of the potato. So we can really focus on the flesh itself and the skin getting pretty crispy on the outside. So you soak them for 10 minutes in hot water, and then you're going to rinse them twice. And that rinse is the same thing. It just gets the starch off the potatoes. And then I put them back in the bowl that I soaked them in after I had dried them off completely. So once they come out of the water, you're really going to want to dry them off because we really want to oven fry them. We don't want to steam them. So when vegetables have water left on them, they'll steam in the oven instead of crisp. So dry things crisp, wet things steam. And this goes for roast chicken, this goes for roasted veggies, anything that you're going to oven roast and get crispy. So dried them off, threw them in a bowl, tossed them with a half tablespoon of olive oil, and then put them into a well-oiled pan with salt, pepper, onion powder, and garlic powder. And you can do this, you can use whatever seasoning you want. And then they go into the oven for 15 to 20 minutes, and then you bring them out and you flip them over. Because what was on the bottom is nice and crisp and golden, and now I want to do that same thing for the things that were there. So I'm going to throw these back in the oven, and I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. Whoop, not 1 minute, 10 minutes. Okay, and to go with our Compost nachos, because I'm dairy free, I don't get to indulge in the amazing nacho cheese that exists in the world, so I had to make my own. So this is cashew nacho cheese. This is vegan, and it takes about 5 minutes to pull together, and then you warm it up on the stove. So once again, a really simple, easy recipe that you can pull together in 5 minutes right out of the fridge. So what that is one cup of raw cashews. They have to be raw, they can't be roasted. So 1 cup of raw cashews that you soak in boiling water for 5 minutes. So 1 cup of cashews to 1 cup of boiling water, soak for 5 minutes. Then you're going to throw it in a high-powered blender or a food processor, and it's going to start, breaking down those soaked cashews, and it's going to start to get really creamy. Throw in 1 garlic clove. I don't even bother chopping it up. 2 tablespoons or more of nutritional yeast, which is vegan Parmesan cheese. 2 tablespoons of hot sauce, or harissa, or adobo chili sauce, anything that's going to have a nice little kick to it. 1 teaspoon of chili powder, and half a teaspoon of ground cumin, and then salt and pepper to taste. So what that looks like is it comes out, and you add the water in too with the cashews, and it comes out to be this kind of thick consistency. Add more water if you want it less thick, and it will thicken on the stove. So if it gets really thick like this, where it's not really pouring, all you have to do is just add a little bit of water, throw it back on the stove, stir it up. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water here before it goes back on the stove. So, to go along with the compost nachos, so we got the base, which are potatoes, but it could be sweet potatoes, winter squash, zucchini fries, anything that you can cut into a crispy fry shape can be the basis of a nacho. You could do a nacho salad where instead of some sort of crispy veggie underneath, you have greens underneath there. You definitely can do anything with nachos. If there's nacho cheese and toppings, it's nachos in my brain. So what I had kind of festering at the bottom of the fridge were some poblano peppers that were kind of starting to turn a little bit of brown on the tips. I just cut off the brown part, and I sauteed them with some onions that were also starting to show a little bit of rot. So these got sauteed on the stove, just simple oil and salt, that's it. And so I really love green things on my nachos, and lucky for me, there's this frisee that was in the fridge. If you're not familiar with frisee, it's a bitter style lettuce, which means it just has a little bit of a bite to it. I actually don't think it's that bitter, but the one thing in my brain that sets it apart from other lettuces, besides this like absolutely gorgeous shape, I mean, like the leaves on frisee just blow my mind, is that it's sturdier than most lettuce. So I actually don't like lettuce. I don't like lettuce that much because you're basically just eating crunchy water. And there's not a ton of flavor to it, and it kind of just dissolves in your mouth. It doesn't have a lot of body to it, and I like things with body because I eat with gusto. So frisee has bite and it has body, which is what I really like in greens. So you know it's there when you bite into it. And the great thing about something that's a little bit bitter is that you can pair it with things that are a little sweet or something that's really savory. And that bitterness has become completely balanced within the dish. So I think this is a great addition to something like nachos, where you have the salty fattiness and starchiness of the fries, you have the fattiness and richness of the cheese, and then you're going to have the brightness of whatever pickled thing or acid that you put on top, like salsa, pickled jalapenos, yogurt, sour cream, tomatoes, all these things that have a little bit of acid to it, which frisee absolutely loves. So what I did once I pulled this out, also the thing about frisee is that it lasts in the fridge forever. So lettuce can go bad really fast, but frisee will last a long time. So this might be something that you would find at the bottom of your crisper drawer because it's just been sitting in there longer. It can last for weeks in a bag. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the tops of it here for our nachos. Look, I just ripped the top off and looks, it's still so beautiful. It's coreless. So you can eat all the way to the bottom. So you're going to get multiple crisper meals out of this one. So I'm going to go ahead and, because it has a lot of body, you're going to want to almost cut it like an herb. So think of like parsley or cilantro. You don't want big chunks of it, like you might lettuce. You want something that's a little smaller. And then it's going to go on top of those nachos really well. Okay, so looks almost like frisee. And one thing that I hear people waste all the time is cilantro. Because a little bit goes a long way. Some folks don't like cilantro at all. So it's almost always languishing somewhere in your fridge. You're going to have some cilantro, you're going to have some parsley, some dill. That's starting to get a little brown at the edges. And nachos can be a great way to get rid of it. Because you can mix it right with this frisee, and then it goes a really long way. So when I cut cilantro, I don't strip it off or anything because I'm a cilantro lover. All I do is just cut the bottom off like this. That gets set to the side. And then I'm going to pull it together and roll it. And then I'm going to do cuts that are perpendicular to the stems. And the stems are part of it because I like that crunchiness. But if you don't like, if you're like on the fence about cilantro, strip it. And it's just going to take longer because the stems themselves are very fragrant and very flavorful. So now I have this huge pile of cilantro. And because I love cilantro and because I love frisee, I'm going to put it all together. So that's going to be like the greens on top of these nachos. So the bite of the cilantro, the bite of the frisee are going to work really well together. If you have a lot of cilantro, that's just like, you don't like it that much, one thing you can do is make a pesto with it. Or you can make a spicy pesto called zhoug sauce. Z-H-O-U-G. Zhoug is an Afghani condiment. It's also used throughout the Middle East. But it's basically cilantro, oil, olives, and peppers, and then salt and pepper. So by peppers, I mean like serrano pepper, or a jalapeno pepper, or crushed red pepper flakes. And it creates this really rich, spicy sauce, which you can use in all kinds of things, including nachos. So we never have cilantro rotting because we love it, but then we also really love the zhoug sauce. So what else is going to go on our nachos here? I said that we needed some sort of acid. So these are some pickled Hungarian wax peppers. As you know from my pickling adventures, I love pickles. This is a fermented hot sauce. That's a bunch of different hot and sweet peppers that I just chopped up, threw in a pickling fermentation brine, let it ferment for a week, and then blended it up. And that is the fry timer, which means that our fries are going to come out of the oven. Oh, they're looking crispy and good. Okay, so this is what you're looking for in that crispiness. I wish you could smell it because it smells amazing. So we have a dark sort of brownie on the top. They're nice and crispy and crusty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take them off the pan and put them on a plate with paper towels just to help them drain. If you want it super crispy, you kind of need to use a good amount of oil. If you have an air fryer, I'm just not hip to that trend yet, but if you have an air fryer, this is a perfect use of your air fryer to get these crispy veggies. Apparently I don't have any paper towels. Oh yeah, I do. We don't use a lot of paper towels in our house, but we do use them to drain things. So I got my paper towels here. You could use old rags or tea towels that you use for draining. I'm going to take my spotted spatula, take them off the pan. Ooh, they smell so good. Nice and crispy. I used to eat so many soggy oven fries. Like growing up, my mom would make these oven fries, and I love my mom, and she's an amazing cook. But they were never, ever crispy because she didn't soak them and didn't dry them off. But thankfully, we have better dissemination of information now. So I'm going to move this and give you another shot of those fries. So here's what they're going to look like. So I'm going to let that drain for a second. The more they drain, the crispier they're going to get. So I lifted off the one underneath. I'm going to throw that on top. Just get more of that. If they sit in their own grease, they're going to get soggy. So I'm not a pizza blotter, nor would I say blot your pizza. It's greasy, but cheese is different than a crispy potato. So a little blotting goes a long way. So I'm actually going to let those sit for a minute to keep draining so they can stay crispy, and then we can assemble our compost nachos. But I mentioned that we had a third dish that we were going to get to on this crisper clean-out meal. And this is one of my absolute favorite go-to dishes, especially in the winter when there's a lot of root veggies and things that just need to get eaten. And the sun goes down at 5 p.m. and I'm exhausted and I don't want to make anything. I'll make a sheet pan gnocchi dinner. So you can basically make this with anything. You can make it completely vegan, you can make it vegetarian, or you can make it omnivore friendly. So all you need is some cut up veggies. So here we have chioggia beets, fennel, and just slices of onion. So the chioggia beets are cut up pretty uniform and pretty small because I want them to cook fast. And I want you want your root veggies to be about the same shape as a gnocchi. And if you haven't had gnocchi, it is a potato pasta. So I got these gnocchi at Aldi. They're whole wheat gnocchi. They're super cheap. And they're shelf stable, so it's something to easily have in your pantry. So we have our cut up veggies, and if I'm doing any sort of allium, so if I'm doing garlic or shallots or onions, I just do really simple slices, because slices roast at the same rate as diced root vegetables, so it's all going to come out nice and uniform. So I'm just going to throw my gnocchi on here. I'm going to take a little bit of olive oil and just go ahead and toss that a little bit. I'm going to do a little bit of pepper and a little bit of salt. I feel like my stuff is everywhere today. So some crushed pepper here, and then a nice kind of sprinkling of salt here. And then I'm using the same spatula. Some people don't like that, so I'm sorry. There's no meat, so it's not really cross-contamination, but don't listen to me on that. Just going to toss it all together. And then this is going to go in the oven at 400 for about 20 minutes. And that's going to be enough to cook the gnocchi. When we have about 5 minutes left of that cook time, I'm going to throw a whole bunch of this really beautiful arugula on top, and that'll kind of wilt down. That'll get incorporated with the veggies. And then when it comes out, we're gonna add this carrot top pesto. So this is pesto made from the tops of carrots. I'm gonna throw this in the oven and I'll tell you about it when I get back. So this is pesto made from the tops of carrots that came from the carrots that went into our vegetable soup. Oftentimes folks have no idea what to do with carrot tops. Hopefully you have a well-loved rabbit in your life or a guinea pig or someone else that really loves those tops. If you don't, pesto is a great alternative. So normally folks just think of basil when they think of pesto, but carrot top is actually one of my favorite ones. It's super simple. You can use whatever you have laying around your pantry. So this is about 3 handfuls of carrot tops, 2 cloves of garlic, olive oil, nutritional yeast. You could also use Parmesan, and then some sort of nut. So some sort of like roasty, toasty nut. So I've actually never made a pesto with pine nuts because I can't afford pine nuts. So I usually use whatever's hanging around. So you could use cashews if they're roasted, or you can roast them on the stove. But I don't really have a lot of nuts hanging around except for my really nice Boss pecans, which I love and I kind of save. So I use flaxseed. So this is something that I normally would put in my smoothie, but the flaxseed gave it some really, really nice flavor. So really great pesto you can make with flaxseed. So when our sheet pan gnocchi comes out of the oven, we'll just toss it in some of this pesto. So this pesto will stay in the fridge for about 2 months or so. But if you want it long term, I would suggest freezing it. And it freezes beautifully. And you can freeze it in a little container, like this plastic container. You can freeze it in a little baggie. You can freeze it in ice trays. So if you just want it for sauces or something really quick, you can just do it in cubes and then pop them out and put them in one bag. So I don't know about you, but I'm kind of interested in eating some of these nachos right now. So they've gotten crispy as they sat. You hear that crunch? I don't know if it's going to pick up on it. But they're really nice and crunchy. So I'm just going to take it off of this greasy napkin. I'm going to arrange it on my plate like this. I'm going to go over to our nacho cheese. It's still pretty thick. So I'm just going to add a little bit of water to it. And if you don't feel like making your own cashew nacho cheese, you can go to Common Ground Co-op and buy the Red Herring pre-made nacho cheese. Shout out to the Red Herring, who's a great supporter of Sola Gradia. Their nacho cheese is better than mine, but I really like making my own. If you're into dairy, then any sort of nacho cheese, or you can add melted cheese and then broil it in the oven. That works really well. So I'm just going to throw some of this nacho cheese on. It's still pretty thick, but that's fine. When we're thinking about crisper clean-out meals, or just any meal in general, you want a pretty good balance of carbohydrates or starches, fat, protein, and some acid in there too. So we have our starch from our potatoes, we have some protein from the cashew cheese, which is full of protein and actually very filling, way more filling to me than cheese was when I used to love and enjoy cheese. So here we go for that nacho cheese. Super delicious. Probably shouldn't have licked my fingers on cooking. I just went into home mode. You know, like who doesn't lick their fingers when they're cooking at home? Okay, so we got our crispy potatoes, we got our nacho cheese. We're gonna add our frisee and cilantro mix. And I'm just like, I really love frisee and cilantro. This is how you get your greens in. You get that nacho cheese in there, then you throw the greens on top. It's pretty much like a better salad. It's like a fry salad. And then I'm gonna take our sauteed poblanos and onions, throw those on top here. If you wanted extra protein, you could add steak or chicken or tofu. You could add black beans or any sort of refried beans to this. Beans are another great sort of alternative. So what we're missing right now is a little bit of acid. So I love limes. I eat a lot of limes. And now that I'm pregnant, I don't eat so much citrus because it gives me a little bit of heartburn. But I kind of suffer through it anyway because limes are amazing. And they're going to help kind of cut some of that grease and bring out the other flavors within here. So I took half a lime, sprinkled that on there. And then, you know, we have a good amount of fat from the cashews, but an avocado is just going to kick it up a notch. And this is going to be a little cooling too for the hot sauce and pickled rings I'm going to throw on there. You could put guacamole on top. I almost never make guacamole because I'm kind of lazy. So I just kind of cut it up. So we're going to go half an avocado on top here. Obviously, I'm not getting a prize in like really beautiful presentation today. I'm going to take some of these pickled hot Hungarian wax peppers, which are a huge staple in our household, pickled peppers. Toss that on here. You could do olives, you could do pickled jalapenos. So some more acid, a little bit of heat. And then hot sauce. Everyone's got their own hot sauce brand. We kind of go back and forth. I don't know if we have an intense loyalty to any hot sauce brand, but Valencia is a good one. Boom. Compost nachos. From veggies that were going bad in your fridge to a delicious, really satisfying meal that's made almost entirely from local ingredients. So the only thing in these nachos that isn't coming from Champaign-Urbana is the Valencia hot sauce, the cashews in the cashew cheese, and the avocado. But everything else is straight from Solagradia Farm. So these are Urbana Compost nachos right here. So I'm going to go check on our gnocchi and see where that's at. It's only been about 10 minutes. But a good enough time to flip around that sheet pan. And we can also check to see, oh, that fennel is smelling really good. I love roasted fennel. It brings out the sweetness. And you can check on the fork tenderness of our veggies here. So they're getting really close. So what I mean by fork tender is that you stick a fork in the vegetable and it goes through really easy with no resistance. So we can set a timer to know basically when things are going to be done, but the fork tenderness is really the true test. Especially for blended soups, your puree soups, it needs to be super soft so that you have consistency throughout your soup and you're not getting kind of chunks. If you're into chunks and that's your thing, then you can leave it a little chunky, but I like a silky smooth, kind of a silky smooth soup. So I'm going to let it go for a couple more minutes, which means we're kind of at a lull of active cooking, but now's a really good time to go over lots of different combinations for crisper clean-out meals. So I've given you a couple examples. So we have our compost nachos. We can utilize a bunch of different ingredients. We have our sheet pan gnocchi, super simple, super easy. If you didn't have gnocchi, one thing you could do is just, boil up some pasta, take that sheet pan, throw it in the pasta, drained pasta, add your pesto or a marinara sauce or even just some Parmesan cheese, and you'd be good to go. You could throw it over rice, just super simple stuff. But I like the one panness where I only have one pan I have to clean. But there's a world of possibilities when we have a ton of veggies left in the crisper. So I'm going to go through a few things that John and I always have in our pantry so that we have a meal we can cook kind of no matter how busy we are, because there's always something left in the crisper. So we kind of need a base to start our meal with. So great pantry basics to have as a base for crisper clean out meals are different types of greens. So in our pantry at all times we have orzo, which is kind of like the pasta rice. We love orzo because it cooks really fast, it has a nice bite to it, and it's really good with roasted vegetables or in super simple summer salads. We have some sort of pasta usually. So this is red lentil pasta, and if you're gluten-free, this is a really good choice. And this not only acts as your starch, but also your protein. So red lentil pasta has, 14 grams of protein per serving. So this is a great plant-based, gluten-free option. We have couscous, which is especially great, whole wheat couscous, especially great during the summer because you just add boiling water. You don't have to cook it on the stove. We have farro, which is a grain that we don't usually see featured very often, but farro has a lot of protein to it. It's kind of meaty. It holds up really well. It's really good in soups or in salads. So we make a lot of barley salads. And it's something we can grow here in the Midwest as a small grain, along with things like wheat berries. And then we have always some polenta or grits. So we make a lot of grits and greens and grits and different roasted veggies, grits and eggs, all types of things. And then we also have cornmeal, which we can make corn cakes or cornbread or anything like that. So this is kind of our bases. Oh, and rice. We always have rice, but the rice is actually in the fridge. So if you're into rice, might I recommend purchasing wild rice from indigenous growers. So we can grow rice here in the Midwest, and wild rice is an important ancestral crop for Native peoples in Minnesota and other areas where they grow wild rice, and it can be a pretty important economic crop as well as spiritual crop as well. So if you're going rice, go wild rice. Grown right here in the Midwest. So that's our base, and then we can use our veggies in whatever way we want. We can air fry them, we can saute them, we can eat them raw, we can roast them, we can boil them, all types of ways. We can make them in a soup and then add a starch later. And then for protein, lots of different options. Meat from your local farmer is the number one option in my mind, but I actually don't eat that much meat. I mostly eat vegan or plant-based most of the time, and I use kind of meat a little sparingly. So we're really lucky to have our freezer constantly stocked with meat from farmers that we know personally, and sometimes animals that we've met, which some people don't like, but that's kind of how I like to eat. I like to face my meat. I like to know who it is. Oftentimes I'll forget to thaw stuff out, so when that happens, we have things like lentils and canned beans and tinned fishes, sardines. Amazing. Sardines are amazing, and they provide they have this nutritional powerhouse punch. So 1 can of sardines, 18 grams of protein. It's amazing. A bunch of omega-3s. These are line caught, sustainably harvested sardines. They have the lowest mercury levels and really low carbon footprint. A little bit more accessible to folks is tuna, which I don't eat that much of because it is over harvested for the most part, even when it's line caught, and it's kind of a less sustainable choice when it comes to tinned fishes. Sardines are really great in pasta dishes, really good in sauces. It can be really a wonderful addition to something like a green salad. And then you need some sort of fat. So that can be the oil that you're roasting vegetables in. That can be something like an avocado. And then a little bit of acid. So things like pickled vegetables, hot sauces, vinegars, balsamic vinegars that go to for me. Soy sauce or tamari. Add that, a little bit of acid. And then depending on your mood, you might want to add something sweet. So raisins can be a really great addition, dates, craisins, things like that. So if you have a well-stocked pantry, you pretty much can make any meal to clean out your crisper. It just takes a little bit of getting to know your ingredients and knowing how to cook with them. And then you can basically just like go to the fridge, go to the pantry, and you can come up with a really easy meal pretty quickly on the fly. So let's check on this sheet pan gnocchi and see where we're at here. So we're getting to the point where it's probably time to flip things over. Our gnocchi is getting crispy. Our beets are not quite cooked yet. So to keep things from sticking, we're just going to move them around on the pan here. Your gnocchi might stick in, they're little those of pillowy goodness. So they might stick a little bit, but that's okay. No meal is ever perfect. So it looks like our beets are not done yet. So we're going to go ahead and throw that in. When you're about 5 minutes out, that's when you're going to want to add your greens to the mix. But that's okay that we're not there yet, because I think it's time for our soup. So our soup is getting fork tender, and we could take it as is right now, but usually you have some greens hanging out in your crisper that you want to get rid of, and especially if they're a little wilty, or you have like the tops of beets, which is chard, basically the same thing, chard and beet tops. You can go ahead and throw those greens in. So this means though that you're going to have a green soup. If you throw greens in your soup, it's going to turn your soup green. So if you have kids that are a little adverse to a green soup, don't add the greens. Maybe leave them for a topping at the end or saute them. So if you're using something like spinach, you're good to go now. It doesn't have to go back on the stove, but it's chard, aka beet greens. So it's going to need to cook down a little bit before we puree it. So it's going to go right back on the stove there. But honestly, these greens are pretty fresh, so it's not going to take that long. And then we can go ahead and puree it. Yeah, that's right. It's the same thing. So the beets that we eat it's the same plant, Beta vulgaris, and the beets that we eat, the root, it's been bred to have a bigger, tastier root, and then Swiss chard has been bred to have a big, leafy green. So when you get beets with the greens on top, it's like you're getting 2 crops in one. It's a bonus. Sometimes beet greens are a little less tender. They can have a little bit more of that chard taste that some folks don't like. But one way you can cut that is the use of acid and sugar. So if you don't like the taste of chard, especially if it's sauteed, then add a little bit of honey, add a little bit of maple syrup, add a little bit of raisins or dates or craisins. It can be super, super delicious. So let's see where our soup is here. Our greens have actually cooked down quite a bit. Sometimes that heat is kind of all you need to have it really cooked down. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this off. And I'm going to use an immersion blender. A blender would work, a regular blender would work great. I'm partial to immersion blenders for soup. I resisted getting one for a really long time because I just was like, I don't need another kitchen implement. I really don't know how to even use an immersion blender. They honestly kind of scare me because it has to be completely immersed. And then like you're basically putting this blade into hot soup, and it seems like a recipe for disaster. But it's not that hard, and it's really easy to use. So even though it's going to be kind of loud, I'm going to do it on camera. So if you're scared of immersion blenders, we can go through it together. So here's what our soup looks like. You can see the greens, nice amount of liquid. You can see the root vegetables in there. At this point, you can do a couple things. If you want to make it creamier, you can add heavy cream to it or milk. You could add something like yogurt to make it creamy and then blend it in. But I like to kind of add things like yogurt or cheese at the end of it. Parmesan cheese is an excellent addition to this type of soup. So, like I said earlier, an immersion blender needs to be underneath to work. So I'm going to immerse my blender and turn it on. So usually it takes a little bit of time to get going, and then you hear a different sound, and that's the pureeing magic that's happening. So sometimes it wants to get sucked down into the bottom, so you gotta resist it. For something like this, it's probably gonna take, so it's changed now because it's not immersed anymore. And now the sound is changing. So now it's actually doing its job here. It's not splashing anywhere. You want to keep it completely underneath. You do not want it to come out. Sometimes it's easier just to hold it in one place. So my soup is looking a little bit like a broccoli and cheddar soup, which is not an appealing look for some folks, but if you are okay with the look, the taste is going to be phenomenal. So even though it's super hot, I'm just going to go ahead and get a taste, and then we're going to know if we want to add lemon, if it needs acid to it, or if it needs salt or pepper, or if we need to add a little bit of richness through yogurt or cream or something. Usually if you have potatoes in there, that gets the creaminess going pretty good. Oh my god, it's so good. The sweetness of the sweet potato really comes out when you're boiling it. So it's the sweet potato, and the turnips too are also really sweet in here. The chard, there's no bitterness from the beetroot at all. Oh my gosh, it's so good. I'm actually, when you add different vegetables together, you sometimes don't know how it's going to turn out, and this combo turned out great. I actually wouldn't add a single thing to it. What I would do though is take some of these fennel fronds from the sheet pan gnocchi and go ahead and chop that up and throw it on top with maybe just a little spin of yogurt or some nutritional yeast or Parmesan cheese if you're into that. So you can't go wrong with a pureed veggie soup. Oh, so good. So you can eat this now. You can eat on it for about 5 days. But one thing I do when I make a big pot of soup like that is I take it and I immediately freeze half of it. so that I have, on days where I'm even more tired than I normally am, it's really easy to pull it out, thaw it out, and have a meal. Okay. So sometimes beets don't want to cook as fast as you want them to. I always run into this with beets. Let's see where we're at here. Actually, we're good to go. They have a little bit of bite to them, but they're really sweet thanks to the roasting. So let's go ahead and construct this dish, and then we'll call it a night. So all I'm going to do, and I can do, so what I can do is I can add to a bowl to what I'm going to do next, or I can just go ahead and do it right in the sheet pan. So I'm going to keep my veggies, man, my brain is going here. I'm going to keep my dishes low. So I'm going to take my arugula. I'm not even going to cut it. I'm not even going to use a cutting board. I'm just going to rip it up. Spinach would work really well for this too. Mustard frills would be another great addition. And it's actually going to wilt right on the pan. So we could throw this back in the oven, but since we're a little rushed for time, I need my oven mitt. We're just going to go ahead and toss it a little bit to get those greens starting to wilt. I'm also going to dislodge all of the good crispies. Oh, I love a crispy bite. I'm going to dislodge all those crispies. And then we're going to go ahead and add our carrot top pesto here. So this is another great source of fat within your meal and protein if it has nuts in it. So as much or as little pesto as you want. And then give it another mix together to incorporate that pesto. Sometimes it's easier in a bowl to do this than it is on a sheet pan, but because everything's pretty sturdy, it holds up pretty well. Gnocchi will store in the fridge because there's no meat. Again, you can eat off of it for about 5 days. I wouldn't freeze this dish, but you could freeze the pesto itself. Okay. So one pan meal, super simple. I would top with a little bit of nutritional yeast here. The beeches give it such a nice color. And then crushed red pepper, because I like it a little spicy. And there you go. Easy, crisper clean out sheet pan gnocchi. This is also a really cheap meal. The gnocchi is like, at Aldi, it's like $2. So CSA veggies, gnocchi, and whatever you have hanging around in your pantry to make a pesto. So I hope this was a illuminating, helpful class for y'all. If you see me out and about, feel free to come find me and we can talk all things crisper clean out meals, all things easy weeknight meals, or just all things delicious and vegetables. So thank you so much to Sola Gradia for having me for another year of cooking classes. Fingers crossed and masked up so that we can do this in person next year. And happy eating, everyone. Enjoy those Sola Gradia delicious vegetables and greens.